Dave with Taboo Customs. This video today we're going to be swapping out a radiator in this 98 Jeep TJ behind me. Okay, so what we have is this 98 TJ that we have somewhat revived from the dead over the last year or so. And in the last 4 or 5 months, we've been driving it daily. And as we've drove it, we've had a few leaks pop up. Been fixing those leaks as they pop up, knocking them out. However, we started leaking coolant a few weeks ago, and within about a week, it started getting really bad. So what you can see here, right along this edge, there's coolant built up in here. Now, initially we thought, all right, it's probably coming from this upper radiator hose leaking down into there and just somehow getting all the way around the radiator there. But we pulled this hose off, and really the hose looks good. Put it back on, filled the radiator back up, and it leaked again, just sitting here pretty good in a few days. So we took a towel and we checked under here, and it is not leaking under that from that upper radiator hose. So our guess is that we have compromised this seal in here between these 3-piece radiators, which have a plastic top, a plastic bottom, and then an aluminum center section. So what we're going to do is we're going to swap this out, and we'll probably go ahead and try taking this apart a little bit, seeing if we can figure out why it leaked, and if we find the culprit, we'll show you here at the end of the video. But let's get started with our disassembly. All right, so the first step we need to do is drain the radiator. Now, if you have an automatic, that'll also mean taking off the transmission line, so you can allow that to drain as well. But if you have a manual, you won't have to worry about that. Now, if you have a stock radiator, you'll have a petcock just under the passenger side of the radiator. You will unscrew that just like you would a normal screw. Now, a lot of those will be pretty tight, so you might need some wrench or a pair of pliers to grab a hold of that and be able to grab it and actually twist it. But you can turn it and it will actually start draining. It'll drain straight down to the ground, which is nice, versus the old metal petcocks, which would drain back towards the rear of the vehicle. Now, don't unscrew it all the way. Obviously, you don't want it to come flying out. It does help to take off the radiator cap, which we've already done, so that air can get to the radiator, allow the rest of it to drain. So next we'll need to pull off the transmission lines. Now, this line will be pretty close to that bucket. We don't really want transmission fluid in that bucket, so just gonna work on the other one for now. All right, so the next thing we're gonna go ahead and pull off is we're gonna pull off the overflow bottle here. You'll take this hose, twist it as you pull it off the radiator. The overflow bottle just snaps down into place. If you look down, you'll see a little nub about 5 inches down on the bottle. You can put a screwdriver behind the bottle and basically just lift up on the bottle, and you should be able to pull it out. All right, so next we're gonna go ahead and work on the upper and lower radiator hoses. Now, these are probably gonna be held on with multiple different types of hose clamps. This would be the most common, and they can be multiple different sizes. The biggest thing to remember in this is, as you take it off, inspect the radiator hose. If you have a lot of bulging or damage to the radiator hose, it's probably a good idea at this point to go ahead and remove that hose. Now, ours takes a normal 5/16 nut driver here, and then as you take that off, when you go to remove these hoses, make sure you twist it first. You want to break the seal loose, then you want to pull it back off, twist as you pull it. Now, what we're also going to do is we're going to loosen this end, and we're going to break it loose. If we can.
mainly because I want to twist it up and somewhat out of the way of the radiator, so it's easier to pull this radiator out. Now the lower radiator hose will be pretty much the same thing. Loosen up the radiator, the hose clamp, twist it to break the seal, pull it back off. Now one thing to expect when you do loosen and remove the lower radiator hose, expect fluid to come out. You're going to get doused. Even if you've drained the radiator completely, you're still going to get doused with a bit of fluid. Now for the next step is you would normally have a radiator shroud here. And there's going to be bolts on each side of that radiator shroud, typically 10mm hex head bolts. Now our Jeep here has had the radiator shroud basically destroyed. We currently only have this little piece over here because it holds the overflow bottle, and someone has removed the rest of it in the past. Now it hasn't caused us any issues here because we, doesn't get extremely hot where we live. So what we'll need to do is we'll need to go ahead. Now normally you could just unbolt this and slide it back out of the way. For us though, it's going to be easier because we can completely take this plastic piece off. So interesting enough, the bolt in this side is actually 11mm. I know the one on that side is 10mm, so. Especially if you got a Jeep that someone has, well, done some interesting work to. Who knows what you might have. All right, so now that we have everything else removed but the radiator, we can remove the 4 bolts that are holding in the radiator. There'll be one in the top and one in the bottom on each side. Now these bolts will be 10mm. On this passenger side, you're going to need at least a deep well socket, maybe a small extension as well, to be able to get down there into that bolt. Now there will be holes that you can stick the socket through. On the passenger side, the top one you can still use a deep well, but you don't need to. The bottom one you're probably going to need to use a regular size socket because there will be some interference perhaps with the steering shaft as it comes down to the steering box. Now also to remember, if I remember correctly, the bottom bolts on the radiator here you will not need to remove completely. We should be able to loosen those up, remove the top bolts, and then the bottom bolts are slotted so we can pull the radiator up, and that will help a lot when we go to reinstall the new radiator, allowing us to just slide the radiator down on top of those bolts and get it in place. Okay, now as we finish taking out the last top bolt here, you're going to want to, especially if you're going to reuse this radiator, make sure you do not allow it to hit the fan or anything else. You don't want to screw up the fins in the radiator as little as possible. And I may have been incorrect before. I thought these were slotted. So either it can be caught up on the slot in the radiator, or I could actually be incorrect and thinking about CJ radiators. Sure would have been nice if it was slotted. This. And it is slotted, it's like a T slot, so it's hard to get it out sometimes. Okay. Okay, so now as I was pulling the radiator up and out, you can see you kind of got to do it a little bit gingerly. I heard something hit the floor. You have to be wary that this is the nut that is used. It's just a little spring nut that goes on the back side there of the radiator. These will often fall out as you're taking this out. So if they do, make sure to try to find that. If you do lose these, I will post a link in the video description to where you can go buy more of these. So anyway, take a look out for that, watch out for that. But anyway, we've got our radiator out. Let's take a quick look at it because I can see that there's already a problem that we probably might have caused our issue. All right, so with the radiator out now, we did notice as we took it out, one of the issues we might have, and I also misspoke earlier, our radiator only had 4 bolts in it. This typically would have 6 bolts in it. There would be a middle bolt in here, but of course with all the mess that's gone on with this Jeep, it didn't have that. What we noticed though is that both of these side pieces here are loose. They're loose down here at the bottom, but tight at the top. So being that looks like our leaks mainly came from potentially this seal here, which isn't something that we've seen a lot in the past. I would guess that because this was not being supported at the bottom and really was only being supported at the top, that extra weight just wore on this radiator until this seal up here perhaps started leaking. But we can't really see where necessarily this came from. The whole area up there is full of radiator fluid, so it's hard to tell if there is an origin point or not. But anyway, that's one thing you might be careful of. If you get under there and you can see that your radiator is loose, you might want to tighten up those 2 bolts on the bottom. So let's take a look at our new radiator and start to get that installed.
All right, here's the new radiator. Now this is an FVP radiator, pretty much just a cheap run-of-the-mill, $110 or so radiator. It is the same style as the OEM with the plastic top and bottom. I believe you can get all aluminum radiators out there, but really we're just trying to get this Jeep going right now. So this was in stock, and we bought it from Rock Auto, which we frequently buy from Rock Auto. We usually don't have too much trouble, but actually with these radiators, we had some struggles. This is actually our second one. The first one came in with shipping damage where something had hit on this end and kind of crushed in this side. This one came in and I was actually missing one of these bolts, which is ironic since our last radiator is missing 4 of them. So that's all we needed was another one that was missing them. I guess having 3 more is better than not having the 4. The radiators look pretty good with the exception of whenever they, both the radiators came in with a little bag of fittings, just with a rubber band around here, which damages all the little fins there. So, that's not the greatest process for that. But anyway, it'll do to get us going. And so let's get to putting it back in.
All right, so biggest thing about putting the radiator in is, one, you want to make sure you don't hit the fan. You don't want to damage anything on the radiator. So before you put the radiator in, one, you're going to want to make sure you've got all these U-shaped nuts in here, these captive nuts. We did go buy a couple. You can find them at Farm and Home, hardware stores, probably parts stores as well. They are 6mm nuts for this Jeep. So if you can go and replace all of those, like I said, you'll have to watch and make sure they're not falling out. So you want them all to be lined up pretty well. Make sure you have bolts already in the bottom 2, one on each side. Make sure they're out a bit, because when you're sliding this down, you're going to want to make sure you get behind the washer and up against the grill. Sometimes you can get out in front of that washer and it won't line up correctly. So just very gingerly slide your radiator down. And make sure you don't hit too much. Would help if you had another person, but unfortunately I don't. Okay, so and then once you get it down inside the slots for those bottom bolts, then you can pretty much just let it sit there and put in one of your top bolts to hold it in place. You don't have to worry about it leaning up against the fan. Once you get that done, put all the rest of your bolts in, make sure you got them in and threaded, and then you can start tightening those down. Okay, now with the radiator bolted in, we are going to go ahead, reconnect our upper radiator hose, reconnect our lower radiator hose. Since we have an automatic, we'll go ahead and we'll reconnect our automatic transmission cooler lines. Would definitely recommend that if you have an automatic, use a line wrench for those. That way you don't round off those nuts. But once we get that done, we can go ahead and work on, well, normally you'd work on getting a shroud connected back to the radiator, but we'll get our little piece back on here. All right. All right, so we have the radiator installed. Now, we did find one thing that we did want to mention before we move on. The holes in the backside of the radiator, I'm not sure if they just punched those or they punched and tried to thread them, but we had a tough time trying to get our bolts started for the shroud here, the little piece of shroud we have left, and especially over here for this intake that we've installed that had a normal bolt in it. That bolt actually wouldn't even start, so we ended up going and grabbing a bolt that was more like the normal shroud bolts, which come to a point, kind of like a screw. So with these bolts, they would start, and essentially, to me, looks like they had to cut the threads in. So you may want to, on the bench, go ahead, thread those shroud bolts into there just to make sure that they're started, or else it's going to be kind of a pain to try to push those in and to thread at the same time. All right, so now we can talk about adding coolant to it. If you have a newer TJ, let's say probably a 2001 to 2004, I don't know the exact years. If you go online, you're going to find people that would recommend a specific antifreeze for it, a Xerox, like GO3 or GL3. Because those Jeeps apparently coming from the factory specified that type of antifreeze. Now, on the older TJs, though, I believe they just came from the factory with standard green antifreeze, like everybody kind of knows and understands. So with that, what we're going to do is we're mainly, and the main thing you probably do want to do is you do want to probably try to match the type of antifreeze that you have in it. This had standard green antifreeze in it, so we are going to match that with standard green antifreeze. Now, one thing that would be recommended and actually is a requirement technically of your warranty on your radiator is to go and flush out your engine of all that old coolant. Unfortunately for us, it's winter. We don't have access to a hose right now because of that, because we don't have the water set up fully in our shop. In the future we will. So unfortunately we can't do that now. Part of the reason why we went with a cheap radiator. Later on, if we have to replace it, not a massive deal for us, but the lack of a flush on this for us is a little risk, and we are matching the type of antifreeze, so not a big worry. Now, one thing I would also recommend is that I recommend that you buy antifreeze and concentrate. We bought antifreeze yesterday. You can buy it pre-diluted 50-50 because that's what you're trying to shoot for. But 50-50, it was $13 per gallon. Excuse me, 50-50, it was $12 per gallon, and for the concentrate, it was $13 and change. So for $1 extra, you get basically twice as much coolant and you're not getting the water. Now, in places that you may not want to do that, if you have really bad, really hard water, maybe you don't want to put that hard water into your radiator and potentially cause, you know, some additional buildup. But for us, our water here is real good. You could also buy, you know, gallons of water and use distilled water. I know some people recommend that as well, but not something we typically worry too much about. One other thing to remember is before you start filling it, make sure the petcock at the bottom is closed. If not, you'll figure that out pretty quickly, or hopefully you will anyway. Anyway, we will start off by putting roughly a gallon in here. Then what we're going to need to do, well, essentially we're going to fill it all the way up, or fill the radiator all the way up with at least a gallon, probably, hopefully more. We'll alternate between antifreeze and water. Then we will start the Jeep, let it run, let it warm up. We need the thermostat to open so that the coolant can cycle through the engine, because we did have some coolant come out of the engine, so we need to replace that coolant to make sure we have enough in here. We will then get the radiator cool down, refill the radiator, and then we will go ahead and fill up our overflow here with just coolant. And unfortunately, you have to make sure you go slow. The right size funnel helps with that often. Or no funnel, it's just as easy. I was actually attempting not to make a huge mess, but that didn't work. All right, so we've started the Jeep up. We've let it run for quite a while just to make sure that the thermostat opened, that the water pump cycled as much through the engine as possible, get as much air out of there. Now, we're going to do that again once we get done here with this video. We've also gone in and we've went ahead and refilled our radiator with straight water. So now we've got about 1 gallon of coolant and then a 2/3 of a gallon of water that we have added. So not quite 50-50, but pretty close. More than likely we started again, get a little bit more air out of the system. We're going to get pretty darn close to having that. But if you want to be closer when you're doing this, we probably recommend doing a half a bottle, half a gallon of coolant, and then a half a gallon of water, and then alternating after that as you went along, just to make sure you got closer. Now, last couple things that we have to do is we will have to fill our overflow bottle here with straight coolant, and then we will also, since we have an automatic, need to go in there and check our transmission fluid, since we did break open our transmission lines and lose a little bit of fluid. So more than likely we will need to go in and add some transmission fluid. All right, thank you for watching. That'll do it for our radiator swap here in this 98 TJ. If you have any questions or comments, you can leave a comment here on this video, or you can reach us on our website, taboocustoms.com, where we also have a lot of rust repair kits for TJs, YJs, all the different models of Jeeps for the most part. We also have a lot of skid plate armor for 4.0s and AW4s and different transmissions that are out there. So be sure to check out our website. As always, like or subscribe is greatly appreciated, and thank you for watching.